Okay, so good morning. I want to thank the organizer for giving me the opportunity to talk. And so that's my topic. So it's not a research talk, it's rather a tutorial. And I'm going to talk about these problems of energy and climate from really a global perspective, both in time and space. So I will need to simplify tremendously, so sorry if you feel I oversimplify. Being from a global perspective, we will be able to focus on things that do not change, like the laws of physics or history. And last but not least, I wanted to emphasize that the talk is not solution-oriented. It's rather what I could be called a conversation starter. I mean, a bunch of things, I think, that should be known before making up relevant solutions. So I'm first going to emphasize our tremendous fossil fuel dependence, and we check that they need to stop, not necessarily because of running out of fossil fuels, but because of climate change. And so there's a need to find alternative energy. And then we turn to physics, because physicists can tell you which are the possible bottles where you can find energy. And so we check that apparently we are facing a tremendous challenge. And then we turn to history, because we're not the first civilization facing a tremendous challenge. And we've checked that challenges already happened in the past. So that's my only slide on fossil fuel dependence, and I like this way of viewing things. You see here, I plot the yearly energy consumption per capita for a number of entities. The world, Spain is in red, but not in tons oil equivalent or joules or whatever, but in energy slaves. The idea is not mine. So if you assume that a slave would be able to give you, I can't enter into the details, but the calculations are really easy. Would be able to give you 2 megajoules a day, then you multiply by 365, and you find a number of joules a year. And what you see here, it's kind of staggering. For example, I take Spain. Each Spanish citizen burns a year the equivalent of 150 energy slaves, which means that if we had to get rid of every other external energy sources, we would need 150 slaves at our service, day in, day out, just to provide the same amount of energy. Louis XIV at Versailles had 44,000 servants. So the US are just, the average US citizen has 10% of Louis XIV in Versailles. The other way around. So it's kind of obvious that if society were a body, energy would be the heart. And so far, globally, fossil fuels amount to 80%, roughly 80% of the energy need. And so where is the problem? First, they will run out, but not now, not necessarily now, but they pollute now. So first, about the running out, it's kind of obvious, and I think everyone knows it. It's like drinking from a bottle you don't refill. Well, sooner or later it will be empty, and that's it. So the answer, the question is not will they run out, but when. And here, for example, you have a curve for a recent paper in 2012. That's conventional oil in red. And so you see its production is peaking right now. Natural gas should be peaking roughly 2040, and coal roughly 2050, 2060. So I promised you a global perspective. Here you have 3 centuries on the slide. So if I sum oil, coal, and gas, the global peak for the fossil fuels should be around 2060. And so it could lead the sensation that we have 50 years left to find alternatives. And the answer is no, we don't have 50 years left, but because of climate change. And then I turn to climate scientists and ask them, what about the outcome of several emission scenarios with respect to the global temperature by the end of 21st century? So if you look at the plot on the left here, you see the emissions for the 20th century's history, And now for the 21st century, since you can do predictions, but you can do scenarios. And so you can start, for example, you see you have a shades of scenarios from the green one to this gray one. So let's try, for example, this gray one. You see it peaks. It's a scenario when emissions peak towards 2060, which reminds the global peak of fossil fuels towards 2060. So that's the scenario. Let's burn everything we can burn, okay? Don't worry about the consequences. And we can ask, so climate scientists, what are the consequences on global temperature of these scenarios as with respect to the global temperature in 2100? And they give you a most probable global temperature increase of plus 5 degrees. So I will summarize this by burn all plus 5, but it's almost obviously oversimplified. Now, if you want to try this scenario, if you want to ask which scenario gives a reasonable increase of temperature, because whether we like it or not, there's going to be an extra increase of temperature. Our business is just to keep it reasonable. And so if you do this kind of scenario, you limit to plus 2 degrees with respect to 1800, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And you see that this scenario peaks, well, between 2010 and 2020, which is now. So plus 2 degrees means starting to reduce CO2 emissions, and so starting to reduce fossil fuels burning right now. And so it's obvious we need other kind of energy sources. And then we can ask physicists. If you picture energy like a fluid, a physicist can tell you which kind of bottles can handle such a fluid. And this is an exhaustive list, and I want to insist on this. You don't have anything else in this universe. So first, physicists will tell you, you can find kinetic energy, which is something moving, okay? And you just stop it and you take away its kinetic energy. So that's wind energy, for example, sea currents, geothermal energy as well, because the heat of a body is nothing but the kinetic energy of its components. So geothermal energy, heat from within the core of the Earth, stands here. And then they will tell you also you have another kind of energy, which is potential energy. And this potential energy always associates with a fundamental force. And we have but 4. We have gravity, we have electromagnetic force, and we have 2 nuclear forces that are just merged in one category here. So gravity, if you want to harness gravitational potential energy, you need to let down something higher. And that's hydroelectricity, for example. If you want to harness electromagnetic potential energy, all chemistry is there. And so you need to find chemical reactions releasing energy, and all combustion reactions are there. Fossil fuels are there, biofuels will be there, and so on. And also solar energy can fit here because it's the electromagnetic potential energy of the radiation from the sun. And then nuclear energy, so that's the nuclear force is the force responsible for handing together the nucleus of an atom. And if you ask nuclear physicists, they will tell you you have only 2 kinds of nuclear reactions, exactly like chemistry. It's nuclear chemistry. 2 kinds of nuclear reactions giving away energy. These are fission, when you take a big nuclei and you cut it in 2 parts, or fusion, when you take two light nuclei and you fusion them. And it's important that in that universe, that's all. So whenever you hear of any source of energy, it must fit into one of these categories. There's no other way around. And so we can ask the question, how could you produce from these energy reservoirs, how could you produce 13 gigaton oil equivalents? So this number is roughly the amount of energy burnt now a year in the world. And it's kind of really easy to remind. It's 7 billion people, 7 giga people, times 1.8 ton oil equivalent each. That's roughly. So Europeans burn maybe 4 ton oil equivalent a year, but on average in the world it's 1.8. So if you multiply this just by 7 gigapeople, you get the amount of energy needed in the world a year. And so I will quickly go through each kind of reservoirs and check what would it take for each energy bottle to generate this. So of course, any solution will be a mix of everything, but that helps to settle the ideas. So for example, windmill, wind farm. To generate this, you will typically need a wind farm as large as the United States. And plus, and I discount storage, energy storage in this, because when you store energy, you lose a part of it. Now, sea currents, let's say we harness sea currents. And there is easy calculation. If you take the Gulf Stream, La Corriente del Golfo, which starts off the coast of Florida and then crosses the Atlantic, if you could suck out 100% of the kinetic energy of this huge current a year, you would only get, you would not even get 5% of this. So which means locally it could be all right, but globally it's not going to be a big deal. And geothermic energy, if you could capture all the heat flux from within the Earth, all across the volcanic areas in the world, which amount for roughly 1% of the surface of the world, you would get 3% of this. So that's for kinetic energy. So you may have other sources in this reservoir, but I just checked this one. Now, what about gravitational potential energy? Well, it's mainly so far hydroelectricity here, and it's kind of completely obvious that you must have a maximum potential, because if this energy relies on water falling on mountains, then if you want to increase the amount of the potential, either you need to increase the amount of mountains, and that's quite difficult, or you need to increase the amount of rain, and that's also quite difficult. And so people looking at this tells you that the global worldwide top of hydro production should be roughly 10% of this. Okay. Now, electromagnetic potential energy. If you wanted to build a large enough solar farm to generate this, well, you need 600,000 kilometers square of cells. I think I took 15% of efficiency for the solar cells here. And that's forgetting about first the energy you lose when you store, and then forgetting about the path between the cells. Now, if you wanted to grow enough crops to generate enough biofuels a year to give this, you will need more than roughly 2.6 times the surface, the area of the United States. And then nuclear potential energy, with fission, you need to fission 6,000 tons, more than 6,000 tons of uranium-235, and you will need also for it to last a little bit to harness other kind of nuclear reactions. And fusion, which is not yet prepared, fission is already working in the 400 plus plants you have worldwide. Fusion is still in development. You will need to fusion 1,500 tons of deuterium and tritium. So I don't have time to go into the whys of these numbers, but they are directly related to the respective trends of the forces, of the fundamental forces between each other. So, it's obvious there is a tremendous challenge before us, because we just checked that we need to replace fossil fuels, and there's no easy way out. There's no easy solutions. And so let's turn to historian, because first you can ask historian, did it happen in the history of the world that civilization collapsed? And well, yes, that's just a few samples of registered collapse throughout the world of history. the world history. So I really recommend those books, Jared Diamond and Joseph Tainter. So it definitely happens. So I don't have time, of course, to go through each of these collapsed. The Roman Empire is a really good example, the Han Empire in China also. I will now focus on one example of historical failure and success, just to not bother everyone and just talk about failures. So what is my example? But I just emphasize that it's just one among many others. I will talk briefly about Vikings and Eskimos in Greenland. You see, it's kind of exotic. So briefly, simply put, what's the story? Around 18 AD, Vikings get out of Norway, and I think historians are still debating why. They settled in Iceland, kind of 70 years later. They settled down just before the year 1000. They settled in the south of Greenland. There are evidences, archaeological evidences of Vikings settlement in the north of Canada, but they didn't really make it. And so this settlement just disappeared. But by the middle of the 13th century, I would say the Viking civilization in Greenland was at its pinnacle. There were 2 colonies, 5,000 people in all, 22 churches. This church is still there. They had 1 bishop. They were depending on the king of Norway, so they were an autonomous community more in Norway. And then comes the surprise. Beginning of the 15th century, last trip between Greenland and Iceland. And 2 years later, last mention in the Norwegian chronicles of a presence in Greenland. And there is no evidence that there were massive returns from Greenland. Apparently, they kind of died there. And what's the encouraging part of the story is that Eskimos had been there for more than 2,000 years, and they are still there now. So how, in the same environment, one civilization couldn't make it, and the other was completely used to it? And there are several reasons. But maybe I think it comes down to just checking that a Viking brought from Norway a hill-adapted way of life in Greenland and wanted to stick to it. And they did have consequences. So if you go quickly to this table, for example, you will check that whether it be regard for food, housing, heating, or boats, Eskimos were completely using things of the environment. Eating seal, fish, a little caribous, because there are some caribous. Well, using ice for your house in Greenland is a good idea, because you won't miss ice, so there would be igloos. Heating, burning seal fat. Boats were kayak. Kayak literally in Eskimos means hombre, boatman. And the kayak is just skin over bones of animals. And if you turn to the Vikings column, where they would meet beef, pork, milk, and if you look a little bit at it, you see that these are animals requiring a lot of areas to feed. They would burn wood, and there's not as much wood in Greenland that you have in Norway. For heating, they would use firewood. For boats, they would use wood and metal. And so they would stick, I would say they would stick to their Norwegian mindset. And apparently there were bad relationships between Vikings and Eskimos. And so Vikings were not really keen on learning from Eskimos the way things were in Greenland. And that triggered a really strong dependence towards Norway, because they needed to import a lot of stuff from Norway. And so that triggered, in turn, a fragile civilization, because it relies heavily on another civilization which is quite far. And what happened? By the beginning of the 14th century, Black Death killed roughly 60% of Norway. And you can imagine that the survivors had other things to do than doing business with Greenland. And so that was completely fatal to the Greenland settlement, because suddenly they were relying, it's like they were relying on Norway, and Norway not collapsed, not disappeared, but well, it was hit really hard. And the Eskimos, they are still there. And so there are many messages you can take out from this story, but I think it's one interesting illustration of the message: don't rely on something you can run out, because sooner or later you will run into troubles. Well, I'm almost done. So what I said, I just first emphasized tremendous fossil fuel dependence, and that they will run out in the future, but that they pollute now. And it's because of the pollution that if you want to limit global warming and climate change, we should still to shift from fossil fuels to something else right now. And so then we reviewed, from the physical point of view, the potential sources of energies that you can harness. There is a limited number of energy vessels, so there's it's kind of useless to look for another vessel. There are only 4 fundamental forces in this universe, and that's it. And there's no easy way out. And then turning to history, we've seen that commonplace collapse is completely commonplace in history. It happened several times. And that we've checked that there were failures and successes already, so we've checked this with Viking and Eskimos. So here are just a few references for history, climate science, energy, and that's all. Thank you for your attention.